Hello again. And you find me sitting on the floor of the studio where I said I would be some 2 weeks back, showing you the racks behind me that were completed. And if I sort of move to one side, there you go. That is the racks in my studio, which you saw in pieces 2 weeks ago. They are now nearly back together. The sound is all plugged in now. The MIDI is all plugged in for this little lot. The keyboards are all plugged in. However, if I move around this way and move that way, you can still see there's a whole raft of rubbish over that shoulder that still needs to be sorted out. And I just haven't got a clear run at it to be able to sort it out yet. But I will. Now, I'm going to start this week with an apology. I made lots of ers and ums in last week's video, and when I was doing the post-production of the video, and yes, I do some post-production on the videos, and it's getting more professional over time as I learn the post-production tools that I'm using. So when I started this channel, I had absolutely no knowledge of video editing really. I knew about MIDI, I knew about keyboards, I did not know about video editing. So I've sort of gone on a journey there. And hopefully I'm getting a little bit more professional as I go along. I say hopefully, but we'll get there. I'm sure we will. Anyway, I said lots of ers and ums, and I noticed that in post-production last week. And my hair is really being floppy, it's annoying me, but hey ho. So I apologise for the lots of ers and ums. My brain went completely blank last week. I knew what I was talking about. I knew what I wanted to say. It was all written in my notes, and I do write notes for when I'm speaking to camera. I don't just do it completely off the top of my head. And I use this little thing now for writing my notes. I don't know whether anyone's ever come across this. This is effectively, what do you call it? Liquid electronic paper. And I use this at work as well. It's an incredible tool. But this is not about my remarkable gadget. It's about music and my thoughts on music and more the technology of music. So I apologise for the ers and ums, and this is going to drive me potty, isn't it? So I apologise for that. The second correction I need to make, which I said last week, in complete misguided. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it at the moment, but with authority, I think is the way I was going to say it. I made the statement with authority that I was after an MKS 50, which is the piano module of the MKS range. What a lot of cobswallop that was. If you excuse my I don't know why I said the MKS 50, because the MKS 50 is not the piano module. It's the MKS 20 that's the piano module that I'm after. But I had it in my head last week. It was the MKS 50, and I apologise for saying that. But that does bring me onto the MKS range. Now, I don't know whether people have come across the MKS range from Roland. In essence, what these were the rack mounts of some fairly well-known keyboards in the Roland range. But instead of like they did with other rack mount modules, so if I move to one side so you can see my racks, excuse me, I have the M1, which is a Korg, so ignore that for a sec. I have the D550, which is the D50 rack mount. I have the JV280, which is the JV synthesizer rack mount. I have over here the D110, which was the D10 synthesizer, D10, D20 synthesizer. So I have all those in my rack from those eras, and they were sort of you could fairly well attune them to what were the synthesizers that they came from. But the MKS range is not so straightforward unless you know what they are. And Roland made an MKS 7, a 10, a 20, a 30, a 50, an 80 and a 100, which were the ranges that they made. And you have to understand what each one of those does to understand whether those are useful to you or not. So I'm just going to move myself back into camera. So let's start with the MKS 7. So that is a picture of the MKS 7. Actually quite a nice looking unit. It's 2U high. Okay. And it's called the Super Quartet, which is interesting because it has no reference on this to what actually is the architecture it's actually taken off from a keyboard perspective. For that, the MKS7 is a Juno 106. So that's the rack mount of the classic Juno 106 synth. Okay, I don't know what the functionality difference is between the two because I've really not gone into it, but I just thought I'd bring that up. They then came up with something called the MKS10. There you go. There is the MKS10. Again, another 2U unit. Another quite smart unit, actually. In fact, all the MKS units are really quite smart looking. And the MKS10 is the first piano module. And it's not moduled specifically on a specific piano. Okay, it's sort of a combination of the RD1000, but not quite the RD1000. Because the MKS20 then arrived, and that is the Roland RD1000 in a rack mount unit. Okay, which is the reason why I want one of those. But that's what I'm after, an MKS20. Then they came up with an MKS30, and there you go, there's an MKS30, yet another 2U unit. Do you get the sort of feeling there's lots of 2U units going on here? And the MKS30 was a modelled rack mount unit of the JX3P. Funny enough, which is one of these synthesizers they've just brought out in the boutique range, but that was the original rack mount for that. Then we went on to this one, which actually was, instead of being 2U, this is only a 1U unit, and it's not really come out very well actually in the photographs. It's one of the best images I could find on the internet for this one. And that was the MKS 50. And that was a modelling of the Alpha Juno. Or is it the Juno Alpha? Alpha Juno. That's what that one is. So there's another one. Then we came on to what I would consider the doodahs of synthesizer modules in the MKS range. This was the 80. This was the Super Jupiter. Okay. And that was a combination of the Jupiter 8 and the Jupiter 6. Sorry, I just kicked the camera. And that I would love to have in my studio. And that above it is the actual programming unit for the synthesizer. So not only do you get the rack mount there, you also get the programmer in the rack mount. So you could have both of those in the rack together, and you'd have a very, very powerful programming synthesizer combination there. Much the same as the sort of the D50 PG100 is to the D50. Now what's really interesting about these actually is if you go back through some of, so the Alpha Juno for argument's sake, and the JX3P, they actually had programmers that went with the synthesizer. Now I can't remember which way around it was, but one of them was the PG300, I think it was. And that was the programmer for the Juno, and that also worked on the rack mount version of the Juno as well. So you could, but the only problem with that was instead of like with the Super Jupiter, which was that one there, that didn't have a rack mount for it. And funny enough, with the PG100, 1000, I keep calling it the PG100, but that's the PG1 is down there. But with that, I keep sort of thinking about how I'm going to use that properly in the studio. At the moment, I have my PG1000 mounted up here. So this thing here is my D50, if you can see that on camera. And over there, as in over there, that way, is where I put my PG1000. So when I'm working on a D50, I've got immediate access to the parameters of the PG1000 to actually modify the tones. And I'm starting to do more and more of that, I must admit. In the early days I bought it and I started playing around with it, but I didn't really get into the sort of modification of the tones. Now I'm starting to get into modification of the tones, which is sort of probably where my knowledge and my playing is going further, moving further forward, just to sort of take out rough edges to tones that I don't like and such like. But I'm also thinking about how do I mount that in this sort of scenario. So whether I put it on a shelf and have the shelf slide in and out. So put a gap effectively in there, put the shelf in there, and it slides out, and then I use my D550 as the program unit. So at the moment I use my D50 as my program unit, and then store the sounds away using SysX, and then drop them down onto the D50. But maybe the way to do it is do it the other way around. So I store my sounds on my D50, D550, and drop them from there to the computer, and then up to the D50 for playing. Don't know yet. I haven't sort of worked that in my head, but I'm working that through that one. Anyway, so that was the D80, and then the last one in the MKS range was the MKS 100, which I don't have a photograph of, and that was a little bit of a departure from these other ones. So these other ones were sort of modelled after the sound architecture of the keyboard to which they were associated with, whereas the MKS 100 is actually a 12-bit sampler. So it's sort of moving into that territory that was occupied by the S range of synthesizers, and probably more people would remember sort of the S330, S750. There was an S50 which was the keyboard version of the S range, and that's was where the MKS 100. And to be honest, if I was going to say, would there be something in the MKS range I wouldn't buy, it would be the 100. I wouldn't buy the 100 because I think you can get a far better deal buying the 330 or the 750 S range than you do get with the MKS. So that one wouldn't be on my range. These ones would. If I had the money, I would buy one or buy several of them, but I don't have the money. They're incredibly expensive. They're quite rare. And again, like I was talking about when I bought my A80 keyboard controller, they are like gold dust. People just do not sell these things. You know, if people have got them and they know what they've got, they don't sell them. It's as simple as that. And if they do sell them, they go for they're quite expensive. So you have to be quite committed about why you're buying it. There we are. So that's the MKS range of rack mount modules. Of course, if I did buy in the MKS range of rack mount modules, I'd have to put some more racks in, because as you can see, mine are fairly full as it currently stands. The next thing I'm going to talk about, I just need to move these, otherwise they're going to go tumbling over if I lean back. Right. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is pedals. I did a video, it's got to be 18 months ago now, when the studio was not here, it was at the other location. And I'd just gone and bought a DH1S, the Roland DP10, and a Stag Suspend 10 pedal. So the DH1S was the Korg pedal for the Kronos, and funny enough, I've actually just bought another one of those because I found the T1 really likes that pedal. So it must be a very similar architecture. I didn't realise the T1 actually had half damper on it, but that pedal works really, really well on my T1. Doesn't work with the M1, works with the T1. The M1 is a straight latched sustain pedal, but the T1 does like the DH, the Korg pedal, the proper Korg pedal. So I've just gone and bought a new one of those for that. And then I have on this beastie, which is my Jupiter, I use the half damper on that as well, because that has half damper support. Whereas the D50 again is a straight latched sustain. It's either off or it's on, but you don't get the half damper. So it's where in the evolution of the keyboards did the half damper technology come in, and it tended to come in on the high end keyboards, not the low end stuff. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but even if you were spending, let's say $1,500, £1,500, whatever it was, on a keyboard in that period of time, it wasn't considered high end. I know that sounds daft, but that's really where we're at. If you were spending $3,000 or £3,000 or whatever it happened to be at the time, then you would have got features like half damper. Now, even now, you tend to find quite a lot of keyboards still not supplied with half damper technology. So what is half damper technology? Well, if you've got a keyboard that has half damper technology on it, it will still work with a normal pedal. Okay, so you can still put a normal pedal, be it one of these things here. That's a DHP 6. Sorry, a DP6, Roland DP6. Modelling up my words. Or there's one over here. One of them, which I've just pulled all the wires up underneath that, which is just a simple foot switch style pedal. I don't like these. That's the reason why it actually is not connected to anything, but it's caught around a load of wires. Okay, so anyway, your keyboard will still support those things, but if you're one of these people who wants to, as if you were playing a proper piano, and you want to sort of depress the pedal, and the pedal depressions start to apply pressure to the strings, which is what half damper is doing. It's applying a very, and the more you press the pedal, the more pressure that's applied. You need a half damper pedal to support that, unfortunately. So, you need to go and buy a half damper. Now, I did a little bit of research this week on this, just so because I was sort of thinking to myself, well, this is ridiculous. Typically, definitely in the UK, I can't say about around the rest of the world, but definitely in the UK, you will pay double the price for a half damper pedal, if not more than double the price than you would do for a standard pedal. So I think the Stag pedal comes in at the moment around about the £19–20 mark. You can pick up an old DP 6 on the internet for about 10 quid. If you wanted a DP20, you'd be talking sort of the better part of, sorry, DP10, which is the half damper version of that pedal. You'd be talking the better part of now £35 to £40. The Korg pedal is just over £40, and the Yamaha pedal, so the Yamaha version of the half damper pedal, is way up in the £70-odd region, which I actually find difficult to. I find it difficult to actually support that price level, given that the rest of the industry, Korg and Roland, etc., sort of pitched theirs in that sort of £40 region. So why Yamaha should be that much more expensive, I don't know why. If I'm honest, is the pedal any different? Not that I can see. I mean, I've had a quick sort of look at it in the toy shop. It doesn't look any different. In actual fact, the nicest action of all my pedals is the Korg pedal. The Korg pedal is the nicest action. It's got a real nice feel to it when you put your foot on it. And quite often I play, when I'm here or I'm at home, I'm playing the pedals with, bare feet or in my socks, because I tend not to wear shoes when I'm in here. Nor do I wear shoes at home when I'm in my house. So, I'm playing them with my feet, so it's a much nicer feel to it. It does actually. It's interesting actually when you transition. I go and play, which I don't do very often live, and you're playing with shoes on. it's a different sort of sensation, but you know, that's a different conversation completely. But it's really interesting, the half damper, you know, how the pedals evolve. One of the things I will say is that if you just want a simple on-off switch, and rather than just the sort of switch one I just showed you there, but a proper pedal with some sort of resistance there, which I prefer personally when I'm playing any of these. I mean, I've got a range of pedals that sit under there and a range of pedals that sit under there. All on top of them have got noted which keyboard they are attached to. I will always go for this spring-loaded type of pedal, because for me that is a far easier and nicer thing to press when I'm playing, rather than just a simple foot switch. Now I tend to use foot switches, not so much now, I have to be honest, but I tend to use foot switches if I'm trying to flip programs backwards and forwards, and you can program the Kronos and the Jupiter and a number of these other synthesizers to send the master MIDI messages around that said, you know, go low program 5, go low program 6, go low the patch parameters. And I tend to use foot switches for that. I know a lot of musicians are now using sort of the iPad interface, where you have everything on an iPad and you just tell the iPad to move on to, you know, patch number 36, which happens to equate to Bon Jovi Living on a Prayer or whatever it happens to be. But that's how I used to use foot switches when I was playing seriously, but I don't play seriously anymore. I mean, my stuff is now limited to studio work, pretty much. So that's me on pedals. And I say I did a video on these things a while back, and my honest opinion is the cheap, well, I wouldn't say cheap, but the stack pedal actually is quite a good deal if you're just looking for that spring-loaded pedal rather than going for the named Roland, Yamaha, Korg, Iberheim, I don't know, whoever makes these pedals. The one thing I would say though is if you're going to go for an expression pedal like that one, which hasn't actually arrived itself back into the rig yet, but that's actually connected to the Jupiter, an expression pedal. My experience of these is by the manufacturer's pedal for the keyboard that you are playing. And the reason for that is that these things work on variable resistance, as in as you do that there's a potentiometer in there, stroke a variable resistor, and as you push these things up and down, that's changing the resistance of the pedal, which tells this thing how loud or whatever function you've got combined onto it. And my experience is that the generic pedals in that sort of area, the expression pedal area, are not tuned to the synthesizer, and you spend a huge amount of time trying to work out the volume levels for the generic stuff, whereas the manufacturer's ones just seem to plug in and work. So anyway, that's my experience of those. I've got to be honest and say my experience of those is limited to the synthesizers within this room and my Korg T1, because they're the ones I play with. But that is my experience today. Anyway, as I said I would show you what my studio looks like from the other side to where you normally see it, which, as I said last time round, you normally have the camera up here pointing that way. The other thing I've done in the studio, and I don't know whether you can see it, but if you look above my head, sort of around there, I've now changed the configuration of the sound in here. Now this particular room is not brilliant for studio work. It's to be honest, it's what I can afford, and that's the reason why I'm in here. But it's not brilliant for studio work. And the reason it's not brilliant for studio work is it's too small, if I'm honest. So what I really need, and I will in the next studio, I know where we're moving to, but that move won't happen until the new year. But in the new studio, when I move there, I know it's going to be another upheaval of moving stuff, but when we move to the new studio in the new year, that has a room that's around about 15 foot long, and that will allow the setup to change quite considerably. Because, and the reason why you want a room of sort of about 10 to 15 foot in length is when you're working on the bass frequencies of a mix of work you're doing, of course, the actual sine wave actually completes around about that 15 foot mark at the relevant kilohertz range. And that's the reason why you need a sort of fairly decent sized room, so you get the resonance and the bounce back. And the bounce back, when it's coming back, doesn't cancel out the sine wave going the other way. So for those of you who've into studios and know what I'm talking about, I'm talking you to speak eggs. Those of you who don't understand what I'm talking about, there are a number of videos on YouTube where they talk about setting up studios and dimensions and what have you. What this new setup does allow me to do is I sit about here when I'm in the studio working. My computer will normally be here, on top of here. It's not there at the moment, but that's where my computer normally sits, on top of there, hence the reason what this is. This is actually a printer for when I'm printing stuff out. So that is roughly, if you like, about the same distance from speaker to, so the correct way to have this set up is speaker to speaker, and where you sit in the middle, so that distance there and that distance there from those speakers should be the same as that distance across the speaker. So effectively you form an equilateral triangle, and by moving the speakers as I've now done in here, that roughly is an equilateral triangle. Okay, it's not quite an equilateral triangle, but it's as near as damn it within about a foot. Okay, so there you go. Again, I thought when I started this I wouldn't actually be a very long video, and looking at the clock counter, it has become a fairly another long video, and I've ranted on for far too long. So it is quite cold out there, and I do need to go and do some other things today. So I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to let you have the rest of your Sunday, and what was I going to say? Yes, I will be posting a video on the Korg P3. There's probably several videos on the Korg P3, hopefully this week. I had to go and print the manual out, unfortunately, because I was just struggling with it. I couldn't get my head around certain things, so I ended up printing the manual out. It's not a very good copy, I must admit. It's sort of been scanned and then something else again, probably scanned several times. But I should be doing some stuff on the P3 this week. And the other thing I've noticed is, I don't know what's happening, but I keep noticing that some of my videos are being reported, and I don't know why they're being reported. There's no bad language in these videos, it's just me. So somebody's obviously taken offence to something I'm saying. I do apologise. I mean, most of them have been unblocked now, but there was a series of videos in the week that have all been blocked, and I've no idea why. So we'll see what happens there. Anyway, take care. See you next week. Bye-bye. If you like the contents of this video, please give it a thumbs up. Apparently it helps the channel and allows other people to find this video a lot quicker. I'm sure by now, if you didn't like the contents of this video, you've already given me a thumbs down. If you want to be notified about future videos that are added to the channel, hit the subscribe button that should be appearing about here.